The last stop. Sarah Chen's fingers danced across the ancient control panel, coaxing life from systems that should have failed decades ago. Haven Station's primary gravitational stabilizer had started acting up again, causing the entire structure to list slightly to port. Most modern stations would have replaced such critical infrastructure at the first sign of wear, but Haven Station wasn't most stations. "Come on, you stubborn piece of history," Sarah muttered, her dark eyes fixed on the fluctuating readouts. The stabilizer's power flow stuttered, then smoothed out as she manually adjusted the backup systems. The station's slight tilt corrected itself, and she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Haven Station hung in the void at the edge of settled space, a patchwork collection of modules and corridors that somehow managed to function as one of the last independent refueling posts in the sector. While sleek corporate stations dominated the major trade routes, Haven served the forgotten corners of space, the prospectors, salvagers, and independent traders who couldn't afford the premium rates charged by the bigger operations. "Sarah, we've got incoming," called Miguel from the traffic control booth. The young man's voice carried a hint of concern that made Sarah look up from her work. "It's a Centauri corporate vessel. Pretty big one, too." Sarah's jaw tightened. Centauri Corporation had been trying to push independent stations out of business for years, usually by establishing their own facilities nearby and undercutting prices until the competition went bankrupt. They'd been eyeing this sector for months. "Let them dock," she said, standing up from the engineering console. "But watch their manifest carefully. I don't want any accidents while they're here." The approaching ship was a gleaming example of modern engineering, its hull pristine and unmarked by the space dust that covered Haven's exterior. It was easily 3 times the size of the vessels that usually visited the station, and its docking maneuvers were precise enough to make Miguel whistle in appreciation. Sarah made her way to the main docking bay, passing through corridors where the walls didn't quite match, each section telling the story of some past repair or expansion. Haven had been built piece by piece over 60 years, starting with her parents' original fuel depot and growing with each generation. Every module had a history, every patch panel a story. The airlock cycled, and Sarah straightened her station uniform, a practical jumpsuit with Haven Station, emblazoned across the back in fading letters. 2 figures emerged from the ship, a tall woman in an immaculate Centauri corporate suit and a shorter man carrying a datapad. "Welcome to Haven Station," Sarah said, keeping her voice professional. "I'm Sarah Chen, Station Administrator. How can we help you today?" The woman's smile was practiced and cold. "Melissa Warren, Centauri Corporation Regional Director. We're actually here to help you." She gestured to her companion, who brought up something on his datapad. "We've been reviewing the independent operations in this sector, and we have concerns about Haven's infrastructure." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her hands clenched slightly at her sides. "Our infrastructure meets all safety requirements. We were certified by the Colonial Trade Commission just last month." "Minimal safety requirements," Warren corrected, her smile never wavering. "And while that might be sufficient for the occasional prospector or salvage hauler, this sector is about to see a significant increase in traffic. The Arcturus Mining Corporation is opening 3 new operations within 20 light years of here. The volume of ships will increase tenfold. We can handle increased traffic," Sarah said, though her mind was already racing through calculations. Haven's fuel reserves were sufficient for their current clientele, but a major mining operation would strain their resources. Warren raised an eyebrow. "Can you? Your power grid is running at 82% capacity just maintaining basic systems. Your fuel storage tanks are outdated, and your docking facilities can only handle 3 ships at once. Centauri Corporation is prepared to make you a very generous offer for Haven Station. Haven isn't for sale." "Ms. Chen, be reasonable. This station has served its purpose, but times are changing. The frontier is pushing outward, and operations like Haven need to make way for progress. Our offer includes relocation assistance for you and your staff." "My staff," Sarah interrupted, her calm facade cracking slightly. You mean my family. The people who've spent their lives building and maintaining this station. Haven isn't just some corporate asset to be bought and sold. It's a home. Warren's smile finally faded. It's a business, Ms. Chen. And businesses either adapt or die. The mining ships will need modern facilities, not some cobbled-together relic running on spare parts and hope. We're offering you a chance to get out before competition forces you out. Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself. Thank you for your concern, Director Warren, but Haven Station isn't going anywhere. Now, did you need fuel, or was this just a courtesy visit? The corporate director studied Sarah for a long moment, then nodded to her assistant. Fill the tanks. Premium grade, if you actually have any. She turned back to Sarah. Consider our offer, Ms. Chen. It won't be open indefinitely. As Warren and her assistant headed back to their ship, Miguel appeared at Sarah's side. That didn't sound good, he said quietly. No, it didn't. Sarah watched as Haven's refueling arms extended toward the Centauri vessel. Get everyone together in the common room after shift change. We need to talk about what's coming. The common room was Haven's heart, both literally and figuratively. Located in the station's central module, it served as dining hall, meeting space, and unofficial family room for Haven's permanent residents. The massive viewport along one wall offered a spectacular view of the star field, though today most eyes were focused on Sarah as she outlined the situation. They'll be back, she concluded, looking around at the worried faces of her crew, her family, and they'll probably try to force us out by setting up their own station nearby. We need to prepare. We could try to upgrade, suggested Kai, Haven's chief engineer and Sarah's younger brother. I've been working on some modifications to the power grid that might squeeze out another few percentage points of efficiency. And I can reorganize the docking schedule, Miguel added. Maybe find a way to handle 4 ships at once instead of 3. Dr. Maya Rodriguez, Haven's medical officer and Sarah's sister-in-law, shook her head. That's all treating the symptoms. The real problem is that we're too small to compete with a corporate station. We need something they don't have, something that makes us essential to the ships that pass through here. Sarah looked out the viewport, her mind racing. Haven might not have been able to match a corporate station's efficiency or capacity, but it had something else. 60 years of accumulated knowledge about this sector of space, about the ships that travel through it, and about the people who called it home. Maya's right, she said slowly. We can't beat them at their own game. So we'll play a different one. She turned back to the group. Kai, how many of those old sensor modules do we have in storage? The ones we salvaged from that derelict last year. Her brother blinked in surprise. 4 or 5. They're pretty outdated. But they work, and they can be modified to detect subspace anomalies that modern sensors might miss. Right. A slow grin spread across Kay's face. Yeah, they can. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Sarah nodded. This sector is full of weird subspace currents and gravitational eddies. The big corporate ships usually avoid them completely, burning extra fuel to take the long way around. But the salvagers and prospectors, they use those currents to save fuel, riding them like ancient sailors used to ride ocean winds. And we could map them, Miguel said, catching on. Create safe routes through the dangerous areas. Exactly. The mining operations will need to move a lot of ore, and fuel costs eat into profits. If we can offer them safe shortcuts through the sector. Sarah let the implications hang in the air. The mood in the common room shifted from worry to excitement as people began offering suggestions and volunteering for various tasks. Sarah watched them with pride, knowing that Haven's greatest strength wasn't its infrastructure or its location, but its people. Later that night, after most of the station had powered down for the sleep cycle, Sarah stood alone in the common room. The star field beyond the viewport seemed to stretch forever, full of possibilities and dangers. Haven Station might have been small, might have been old, but it was home, and she would find a way to keep it that way. The stabilizer hiccuped again, causing a slight tremor through the deck plates. Sarah patted the nearest wall affectionately. "Don't worry, old girl," she whispered. "We're not done yet. Not by a long shot." Strange signals. 2 weeks after the Centauri Corporation's visit, Haven Station hummed with activity. Kai had mounted the salvaged sensor arrays in a sprawling pattern across the station's outer hull, creating an impromptu detection grid that extended their scanning range by nearly 50%. The old equipment might have been outdated, but in Kai's capable hands, it performed well beyond its original specifications. Sarah stood at the main sensor console, watching as data streamed in from the new array. They'd already mapped several promising subspace currents, but something else had caught her attention. A faint signal, barely detectable, pulsing at regular intervals from somewhere in the nearby asteroid field. "Are you seeing this?" she asked Miguel, who was monitoring the traffic patterns from his station nearby. He nodded, frowning at his own display. "It's weird. Doesn't match any known distress beacon frequencies, but it's definitely artificial. Want me to flag it for the next patrol ship?" Sarah studied the signal's pattern. There was something almost familiar about it, like a half-remembered song. "No, let's check it out ourselves. Get the Wanderer prepped for launch." The Wanderer was Haven's auxiliary vessel, a compact survey ship that Sarah's parents had acquired years ago for emergency repairs and short-range exploration. While the station itself couldn't move from its strategic position, the Wanderer gave them some mobility within the sector. "I'm coming with you," Kai announced, appearing in the doorway with a toolkit slung over his shoulder. "Those readings are like nothing I've ever seen. Could be valuable salvage." An hour later, the Wanderer cruised through the asteroid field, its enhanced sensors following the mysterious signal to its source. Sarah piloted while Kai monitored the readings, each of them wearing the comfortable silence of siblings who'd worked together for years. "There," Kai said suddenly, pointing through the viewport. "That big one, about 2 kilometers across. The signal's coming from inside it." Sarah maneuvered carefully around the tumbling space rock, looking for a suitable landing site. The asteroid's surface was pockmarked with craters and crevices, but one feature stood out: a perfectly geometric opening, its edges too regular to be natural. "Well," she muttered, "that's not ominous at all." They sat down near the entrance, the Wanderer's landing struts crunching softly in the asteroid's loose surface material. After a thorough environmental check, they donned their EVA suits and stepped out onto the asteroid's surface. The artificial cave extended deep into the rock, its walls smooth and covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change in the beam of their helmet lights. Kai ran his scanner over the nearest section of wall. "This is incredible," he breathed. "These patterns, they're not decorative. They're some kind of energy conduit system, but the technology is like nothing in our database. This place is old, Sarah, really old." They followed the tunnel deeper, their boot magnets clicking against the metallic floor. The signal grew stronger, leading them to a vast chamber in the asteroid's core. And there, suspended in the center of the space, they found its source. The object was roughly spherical, about 3 meters in diameter, with a surface that seemed to ripple and flow like liquid metal. It hung in the air without any visible means of support, slowly rotating and emitting pulses of energy that matched the signal they detected. "Definitely not corporate salvage," Sarah said, her voice hushed despite the private comm channel between their helmets. "This is way beyond anything I've ever seen." Kai approached the sphere cautiously, his scanner whirring. "The energy readings are off the scale. Whatever this is, it's incredibly powerful. And..." He paused, adjusting something on his device. "Sarah, I think it's waking up." As if in response to his words, the sphere's surface began to move more rapidly, its liquid metal texture forming and reforming into complex patterns. A soft blue light emanated from within, growing steadily brighter. "We should go," Sarah said, taking a step back. "Right now." They barely made it back to the Wanderer before the energy readings from the sphere spiked dramatically. As they lifted off from the asteroid's surface, Sarah caught a glimpse of the cave entrance they'd used. It was now sealed, the geometric opening having disappeared as if it had never existed. "What do you think it is?" Kai asked as they headed back to Haven, his eyes still fixed on the sensor readings he'd recorded. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's active now. And I have a feeling that's going to mean trouble." She was right. Over the next few days, ships passing through Haven's sector reported strange equipment malfunctions. Navigational systems would temporarily fail, power systems would fluctuate, and subspace communications would be filled with bizarre interference patterns. Sarah and her crew worked around the clock, analyzing the data from their sensor grid and trying to understand what was happening. The sphere's energy signature had changed, becoming more complex and widespread. It was as if it was reaching out, touching everything in the sector with tendrils of unknown energy. "Look at this," Maya said one evening, bringing up a holographic display in the common room. It showed the spread of the energy field over time, represented as a slowly expanding web of light. "It's not random. There's a pattern to it, almost like it's searching for something." Sarah finished. She'd been watching the pattern develop, and something about it nagged at her instincts, or maybe testing something. A priority alert chimed from the communications console. It was a message from the Colonial Science Division, marked urgent and encrypted. Sarah input her administrator codes and the message decoded itself. "Attention, all estations. Analysis of recent spatial anomalies indicates presence of ancient precursor technology. Energy signature matches theoretical models of prototype stellar manipulation device. All stations ADVISED. Prepare for possible large-scale spatial disturbances. Further instructions to follow." "Precursor technology," Miguel whispered, his face pale. "I thought that was just stories." Sarah remembered the tales. Everyone did. The precursors were said to have been an advanced civilization that vanished millennia ago, leaving behind only fragments of their impossibly advanced technology. Most people considered them myths, but here was proof, sitting in an asteroid less than a day's travel from Haven. "We need to tell them what we found," Kai said. "The science division needs to know exactly where." He was cut off by a sudden violent tremor that shook the entire station. Warning alarms blared as systems throughout Haven reported critical failures. "What's happening?" Sarah demanded, rushing to the nearest console. "It's the sphere." Kai's fingers flew across his engineering station's controls. It's doing something to local spacetime. The readings are completely impossible." Through the common room's viewport, Sarah watched in horror as space itself seemed to ripple and distort, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The star field wavered and twisted, and in the distance, she could see the asteroid field beginning to break apart. "Get me station-wide," she ordered, and when Miguel nodded, she keyed the comm. "All hands, this is Administrator Chen. We have an emergency situation. All non-essential personnel to emergency shelters immediately." This is not a drill. As her crew scrambled to respond, Sarah stared out at the increasingly chaotic space beyond Haven's walls. They had awakened something ancient and powerful, something that had been sleeping in the darkness for countless ages. And now, for better or worse, they would have to deal with the consequences. The Great Migration. Haven Station's common room had been transformed into an emergency command center. Holographic displays filled the air, showing the ever-expanding wave of spatial distortions emanating from the precursor artifact. Ships from across the sector were converging on Haven, seeking refuge from the increasingly dangerous conditions in surrounding space. "That makes 37 vessels currently docked or waiting for clearance," Miguel reported, his voice hoarse from hours of coordinating traffic. "We're way beyond capacity, Sarah, even with the emergency protocols in place." Sarah nodded grimly. She hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours, surviving on synthetic caffeine and determination. "How many are reporting damage?" 23. Mostly minor. Navigation systems, power fluctuations, but 3 of them lost their main drives completely when they tried to jump to FTL within the affected zone. A flash of movement caught Sarah's attention. Through the viewport, she watched as a sleek corporate transport emerged from FTL at the edge of their sensor range, its hull gleaming in the starlight. It was another Centauri vessel, larger than the one that had visited weeks ago. "Incoming transmission," Miguel announced. "It's Director Warren." Sarah took a deep breath, straightening her rumpled uniform. "Put her through." Melissa Warren's hologram appeared in the center of the room, her pristine appearance a stark contrast to Haven's chaos. But there was something different in her expression now, a tension that hadn't been there during her last visit. The Great Migration. Haven Station's common room had been transformed into an emergency command center. Holographic displays filled the air, showing the ever-expanding wave of spatial distortions emanating from the precursor artifact. Ships from across the sector were converging on Haven, seeking refuge from the increasingly dangerous conditions in surrounding space. That makes 37 vessels currently docked or waiting for clearance, Miguel reported, his voice hoarse from hours of coordinating traffic. "We're way beyond capacity, Sarah, even with the emergency protocols in place." Sarah nodded grimly. She hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours, surviving on synthetic caffeine and determination. "How many are reporting damage?" 23. "Mostly minor. Navigation systems, power fluctuations, but 3 of them lost their main drives completely when they tried to jump to FTL within the affected zone." A flash of movement caught Sarah's attention. Through the viewport, she watched as a sleek corporate transport emerged from FTL at the edge of their sensor range, its hull gleaming in the starlight. It was another Centauri vessel, larger than the one that had visited weeks ago. "Incoming transmission," Miguel announced. "It's Director Warren." Sarah took a deep breath, straightening her rumpled uniform. "Put her through." Melissa Warren's hologram appeared in the center of the room, her pristine appearance a stark contrast to Haven's chaos. But there was something different in her expression now, a tension that hadn't been there during her last visit. "Administrator Chen," Warren said, skipping the usual corporate pleasantries, "I assume you've been monitoring the situation." "We have a front-row seat," Sarah replied. "Your transport is the 8th corporate vessel to arrive in the last 12 hours. I'm guessing the mining operations aren't going as planned." Warren's jaw tightened. "The spatial distortions are making standard shipping routes impassable. We've lost contact with 3 outposts, and the latest projections suggest the affected area will double in size within the next 72 hours. She paused, clearly struggling with what she had to say next. "We need your help." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Our help? Your sensor data? Our analysts say you've been tracking the anomaly since they began, using some kind of modified legacy equipment. The readings you're getting are more detailed than anything our modern systems can provide. And," Warren hesitated again, "we need your mapped routes through the subspace currents." Understanding dawned. "Because they're the only safe way to navigate through the distortions." "Yes, the Colonial Science Division is mobilizing everything they have, but it will take weeks for their ships to reach this sector. In the meantime, we need to evacuate as many people as possible from the affected worlds and outposts, and we need to do it without losing more ships." Sarah studied the corporate director's hologram, seeing the fear hidden beneath her professional demeanor. "This isn't just about evacuation, is it? You've figured out what the artifact is doing." Warren's image flickered slightly. "It's a stellar manipulator, like the science alerts suggested. But it's not just affecting nearby stars. It's creating a cascade effect through subspace, if it isn't stopped." She left the sentence unfinished. "Send your ship in," Sarah decided. "We'll transmit the sensor data and navigation routes. But I have conditions." "Of course you do." "Haven Station coordinates the evacuation. All of it. Corporate ships, independent vessels, everyone. We know this sector better than anyone. And we know how to keep ships safe in dangerous space. You want our help. You play by our rules." Warren was silent for a long moment, probably conferring with her superiors via her neural implants. Finally, she nodded. Agreed. But we'll need to expand your capacity. I'm authorizing emergency resources, fuel, supplies, medical equipment, whatever you need. Glad we understand each other, Sarah said. Miguel will transmit docking coordinates. Chen out. As Warren's hologram faded, Kai spoke up from his engineering station. You realize we've never coordinated anything close to this scale before. We've never had to. Sarah turned to address the entire room. But we're about to become the most important station in the sector. I need everyone at their best. Maya, set up a trade center in Cargo Bay 3. We'll be getting wounded. Kai, start installing those sensor upgrades on any ship that can handle them. Miguel, draft a priority schedule for the evacuation ships. Focus on the settlements closest to the artifact first. The next several days passed in a blur of activity. Haven's population swelled as it became the central hub for the evacuation effort. Every available space was converted to temporary housing or emergency services. The station's corridors echoed with dozens of languages as refugees and crew members from countless worlds worked together to save as many as possible. Corporate ships arrived regularly, their holds packed with evacuees and emergency supplies. Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and exhaustion as Haven's crew coordinated the massive operation, turning their small station into command central for the largest migration in the sector's history. But the crisis was far from over. The spatial distortions continued to grow, making each evacuation run more dangerous than the last. Ships would return with their hulls scored by energy discharges, their crews shaken but determined to go back for more survivors. Sarah. Kai called out one evening, his voice carrying an urgent edge that made her hurry to his station. Look at these readings from the artifact. The holographic display showed the sphere's energy signature, but something had changed. The regular pulses had become erratic, spiking at random intervals with increasing intensity. It's becoming unstable, Kai explained. The power levels are off the charts, and the spatial distortions are starting to affect normal space more directly. We've got maybe 48 hours before. Before what? Before it tears the sector apart. The subspace currents we've been using for navigation. They're starting to collapse. Soon, there won't be any safe routes left, not even for the smallest ships. Sarah stared at the display, watching as another energy spikes sent ripples through local spacetime. They had saved thousands already, but there were still so many people out there, waiting for rescue. And now time was running out. Send word to all ships, she ordered. Maximum capacity runs only from now on. No more half-full holds or single-family shuttles. We load them up and get them out of here as fast as we can. And after that? Miguel asked quietly. Sarah's gaze drifted to Haven's viewport, where the star field had become a twisted, distorted mess of light and shadow. After that, we figure out how to stop it. Because if we don't, there won't be anything left to evacuate. Breaking physics. It's the modular design, Kai said suddenly, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over Haven's engineering bay. He'd been staring at technical schematics for hours, surrounded by holographic displays showing the precursor artifact's energy patterns. Sarah looked up from her own work, dark circles under her eyes evidence of another sleepless night. What about it? Haven's design. We're not one solid structure. We're dozens of independent modules connected together, each with its own power system, its own gravitational field. He rushed to the main display, fingers flying over the controls. Look at what the artifact is doing to spacetime. It's creating overlapping fields of distorted space, each with its own physical laws. Like our modules, Sarah said slowly, beginning to understand. Each one maintaining its own environment. Exactly. Kai's eyes were bright with excitement. The corporate stations are having trouble because they're trying to maintain a single unified field. But we're already used to managing multiple overlapping fields. We do it every day, just keeping this place running. Maya, who had been listening from her makeshift medical station nearby, frowned. But how does that help us stop the artifact? Because we can use it, Kai explained. The artifact's energy is chaotic now, but it's still following patterns. If we could create a matching set of overlapping fields, like a resonance pattern, we could disrupt it, Sarah finished, like using sound waves to shatter glass. She studied the schematics more closely, but we'd need to be close to the artifact, inside the worst of the distortions. No ship could survive that. A ship couldn't, Kai agreed, but Haven could. If we reconfigure our modular fields just right, we might be able to shield ourselves long enough to get close. Sarah stared at her brother. Are you suggesting we move the entire station? We have engines, he pointed out. They haven't been used in years, but they're still there. And with the corporate resources we've been given for the evacuation, we could retrofit them. Sarah murmured, the idea taking hold in her mind. Update the propulsion systems, reinforce the structural integrity fields. She shook her head. It's crazy. Crazy enough to work. Kai grinned. Sarah looked around the engineering bay, at the station that had been her home for her entire life. Haven had always adapted, always found a way to survive. Maybe this time, that adaptability could save more than just themselves. Get me Director Warren, she ordered Miguel through the comm. And tell everyone to prepare for an emergency meeting in the common room. We're going to need every pair of hands we can get. The next 36 hours were a blur of frantic activity. Corporate engineering teams worked alongside Haven's crew, retrofitting the station's ancient engines with modern technology. Every available power cell was rerouted to strengthen the modular containment fields, and the sensor grid was recalibrated to help navigate through the spatial distortions. Shield simulations are complete, Kai reported, his voice tense with exhaustion. If we maintain the right resonance pattern between modules, we should be able to create a bubble of stable space around us. It won't last long, but it might be enough. Sarah nodded, studying the final preparations. Most of Haven's residents had been evacuated, leaving only a skeleton crew of volunteers. The station felt eerily empty, its usually bustling corridors silent save for the hum of machinery. Last transport is away, Miguel announced from his station. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Sarah took a deep breath, looking at each member of her remaining crew. They were all volunteers, all aware of the risks. Most had grown up on Haven, had helped build it piece by piece, and now they might have to sacrifice it all to save the sector. Begin launch sequence, she ordered. Kai, start powering up the modules in sequence. Maya, monitor life support stability. Miguel, plot us a course through the distortion field. Haven Station shuddered as its engines fired for the first time in decades. The massive structure slowly began to move, each module adjusting its position slightly to maintain the complex resonance pattern they calculated. Through the viewport, Sarah watched as they approached the edge of the severely distorted space surrounding the artifact. The stars seemed to bend and twist impossibly, and sensors showed massive energy spikes rippling through the area. Entering the distortion field in 5, Miguel counted down. 4, 3, 2, 1. The station shuddered violently as they crossed the threshold. Warning alarms blared as the outer modules reported strain from the conflicting spatial forces, but Haven held together, its patchwork design proving to be its greatest strength. Modular fields holding. Kai shouted over the noise. Resonance pattern is stable, for now. They pushed deeper into the chaos, Haven's modules working in concert to maintain their protective bubble of normal space. Through the sensors, they could see the artifact ahead, its energy output now completely unstable. We're as close as we can get, Miguel reported. Any further and the structural integrity fields will fail completely. Sarah nodded grimly. Kai, begin the resonance sequence. Everyone else, brace for impact. Haven's modules began to pulse with energy, each one carefully timed to create a complex interference pattern. The station groaned under the strain as conflicting forces pulled at its structure. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then suddenly, the artifact's erratic pulses began to change, falling into rhythm with Haven's resonance pattern. The sphere's surface became more agitated, its liquid metal appearance boiling with barely contained energy. "It's working," Kai exclaimed. "The artifact's field is destabilizing." "Wait." His eyes widened in alarm. "Energy spike incoming. Massive." The rest of his warning was lost as reality seemed to tear itself apart around them. Haven's modules screamed with the strain as space itself twisted and buckled. Through the chaos, Sarah caught a glimpse of the artifact beginning to collapse in on itself, its ancient power finally turning inward. "Hold on," she shouted, though she could barely hear her own voice over the cacophony of alarms and straining metal. Just a few more seconds. The artifact's collapse reached a critical point, and a wave of pure energy exploded outward. Haven's modules flexed and shifted, each one absorbing and redirecting a portion of the blast. But the strain was too much. Sarah watched in horror as warning lights cascaded across her console, showing one module after another beginning to fail. "Kai," she called out, "can we jump to FTL?" "The engines are barely holding together," he shouted back. "If we try to jump now, we don't have a choice. Miguel, plot the shortest possible jump out of the distortion field. Everyone, emergency positions." As Haven's crew scrambled to comply, Sarah placed her hand on the nearest wall, feeling the vibrations of the station that had been her home for so long. "One last trip, old girl," she whispered. "Make it count." Legacy of Haven. The jump to FTL was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Haven Station's modules groaned and twisted as they tore through spacetime, the already stressed structure pushed far beyond its design limits. Warning klaxons blared throughout the station as systems failed one after another. "Primary power failing," Kai shouted over the chaos, switching to emergency reserves. Through the viewport, space itself seemed to blur and distort. The familiar blue-white streaks of FTL travel twisted into impossible patterns by the lingering effects of the artifact's destruction. Sarah gripped her console tightly, watching as damage reports flooded in from every section of the station. "Hull breach in Module 7. Maya reported. Emergency containment holding. Barely. 30 seconds to exit point." Miguel called out, his hands dancing across the navigation controls. 25. 20. Sarah felt rather than heard the sharp crack that ran through Haven's superstructure. A massive tremor shook the entire station, and for one terrifying moment, she thought they were about to break apart completely. 10 seconds. Miguel's voice was barely audible over the sound of straining metal. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Haven erupted from FTL in a burst of energy, its modules immediately beginning to separate as the emergency containment fields failed. Through the chaos, Sarah caught glimpses of normal space. They'd made it out of the distortion zone. "All hands. Emergency protocols." She ordered through the station-wide comm. "Seal off any breached sections and get to your designated safe zones." The next few hours were a blur of emergency repairs and damage control. Haven's crew worked tirelessly to stabilize what they could, but it was clear that the station would never be the same. Nearly a third of its modules were completely destroyed, and most of the others had suffered severe damage. It wasn't until much later, when the immediate crisis had passed, that they were able to assess what they'd accomplished. The artifact was gone, its ancient power completely neutralized. The spatial distortions were already beginning to fade, leaving normal space in their wake. Sarah stood in what remained of the common room, looking out at the stars through a cracked but still functional viewport. The view was different now. They'd jumped several light years from their original position, and Haven would never return to its old location. "Message from Colonial Command," Miguel said quietly, approaching with a datapad. "They're calling it the Haven Protocol now. The way we used modular fields to counter the artifact. They want to implement similar systems across all stations in regulated space." Sarah took the datapad, scanning through the message. "They're already studying the sensor data we collected." That was fast. The corporate engineers helped with that, Kai added, joining them at the viewport. Turns out nearly getting wiped out by an ancient alien device makes people pretty cooperative. He gestured at the datapad. There's more. Keep reading. Sarah scrolled down, her eyes widening slightly. They want to rebuild Haven. Here. Not just rebuild, Maya said, appearing with a fresh cup of coffee that she handed to Sarah. They want to expand it. Make it a primary research station for studying spatial phenomena and precursor technology. With us in charge of operations. Us. Sarah looked around at her crew, her family. Despite their exhaustion, she could see the same spark of excitement in their eyes that she felt growing in her own heart. Well, Kai grinned, we did just prove that our cobbled-together relic could do something their modern stations couldn't, and Director Warren herself signed off on the proposal. Sarah turned back to the viewport, considering. Haven had always been more than just a collection of modules and corridors. It had been a home, a sanctuary, a place where anyone could find help when they needed it. Maybe now it could be something even more. We'll need to redesign the modular system, she said slowly. Incorporate what we learned about resonance patterns, and the docking facilities should be expanded. Is that a yes? Miguel asked, though he was already smiling. Sarah nodded. It's a yes, but we do this our way. Haven stays independent. We'll work with the corporations and Colonial Command, but we don't answer to them. And we keep the diner. The diner. Maya laughed. After everything that's happened, that's what you're worried about. Hey, you'd be surprised how many important decisions in this sector have been made over a plate of slightly questionable alien tentacles. Sarah smiled. Besides, it's tradition. Over the next few months, Haven began to transform. Corporate resources and colonial engineering teams arrived to help with the reconstruction, but true to their word, they worked under Haven's direction. The station's modular design was enhanced and improved, incorporating the lessons learned from their encounter with the artifact. New modules were added, including state-of-the-art research facilities and expanded living quarters. But at its heart, Haven remained true to its origins. The diner was rebuilt exactly as it had been, right down to the slightly mismatched chairs and the old holoscreen that still occasionally showed static. 1 year after the artifact incident, Sarah stood in the new common room, watching as ships arrived for Haven's official reopening ceremony. Corporate vessels and independent traders docked side by side, their crews mingling in the station's corridors just as they always had. Administrator Chen, a familiar voice called. Sarah turned to see Director Warren approaching, looking somewhat less pristine than usual in practical station wear. The Security Council's waiting for your briefing on the new early warning system. Tell them I'll be there shortly, Sarah replied. I just wanted to see this first. Through the viewport, she could see the next generation of Haven taking shape. The station's modules gleamed in the starlight, each one a perfect blend of old and new technology. Sensor arrays stretched out into space, keeping watch for any more ancient surprises that might be lurking in the darkness. But more importantly, she could see ships approaching from all directions. Corporate freighters, independent traders, research vessels, and everything in between. All of them coming to Haven, just as they always had. You know, Warren said, following Sarah's gaze, when I first came here, I thought this place was obsolete. A relic that needed to be replaced by something more efficient, more modern. And now I understand why it's survived so long. It's not about the technology or the location. It's about the people. The way this place brings everyone together, finds solutions no one else would think of. She smiled slightly. The Centaur Corporation has learned a lot from Haven Station. Sarah nodded, thinking of all the changes the past year had brought. Haven was different now, bigger and more important than ever before. But at its core, it was still the same, a place where anyone could find help, where the impossible became possible, and where humanity's adaptability and determination shone brightest. Come on, she said, turning from the viewport. Let's not keep the Security Council waiting. We've got work to do. As she walked through Haven's corridors, Sarah felt the familiar hum of the station's systems beneath her feet. The modular fields pulsed in their new resonance patterns, stronger and more stable than ever before. Haven had evolved, just as it always had, finding a way to turn crisis into opportunity. And somewhere out in the darkness of space, other ancient artifacts might be waiting to be discovered. But thanks to Haven and its crew, humanity would be ready for them. They had proven that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best ones, and that the true strength of any station, any people, lay not in its technology, but in its ability to adapt, to cooperate, and to face the unknown with determination and hope. Haven Station would continue to stand as a testament to that truth, a beacon in the darkness, ready to help those in need and face whatever challenges the universe might bring. Not bad, Sarah thought, for a cobbled-together relic running on spare parts and hope.